Welcome to a deep dive. You won't soon forget, we're taking an in-depth look at autism spectrum disorder and Miller-Dieker syndrome. And honestly, this isn't just about medical jargon. It's about understanding the real-life experiences of those who navigate these conditions.
What I find fascinating is how two seemingly different conditions, ASD and MDS, can actually share some common ground. But before we jump into those intersections, let's make sure we're on the same page about what makes each one unique.
Yeah, let's start with autism spectrum disorder, ASD. The term spectrum really is key here, isn't it?
It really is. It highlights the diversity within this diagnosis. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation at all. Think of it like a spectrum of colors, each shade representing a unique way individuals with ASD experience the world. Their communication, social interactions, behaviors, sensory experiences, they can all differ greatly.
So how do we even begin to understand the core features of ASD within this spectrum then?
Imagine trying to decipher a foreign language without a translation guide. That can be what social interactions feel like for some individuals with ASD. They might struggle to read facial expressions, understand things like sarcasm, or even navigate all those unspoken rules of social engagement. And this can make building and maintaining relationships particularly challenging.
Right, it's like they're playing a game but they don't know all the rules, which would be so isolating.
Exactly. And then we have repetitive behaviors. Those can actually offer comfort and predictability, especially in a world that can feel overwhelming. It's about finding a sense of control, I think. These behaviors might manifest as strict routines or fixations on certain interests, even repetitive movements.
It's interesting how those behaviors are often misinterpreted, but they actually serve a very real purpose for the individual.
Precisely.
And then there's sensory sensitivities, right?
Yeah, imagine feeling bombarded by, let's say, the hum of fluorescent lights or the scratch of a certain fabric. For individuals with ASD, sensory input can be amplified or even muted in ways most of us can't imagine.
It's like their senses are on high alert, picking up on details others might miss.
Exactly.
Okay, so switching gears now to Miller-Dieker syndrome, we're talking about a rarer condition, and it has this profound impact on brain development, so understanding genetics is crucial here, right? Yeah.
It is. Picture a complex blueprint, but with a critical page missing that's essentially MDS. It's caused by a deletion, like a missing piece, on chromosome 17. And this disrupts the process of brain development, especially the formation of those folds and grooves on the brain's surface.
Okay, and that abnormality is called lissencephaly, is that right?
Yes, lissencephaly.
It's a word that almost sounds musical, but I'm guessing the reality is anything but harmonious.
Unfortunately, you're right. Imagine a building trying to function with incomplete walls and wiring. That's kind of like what happens with lissencephaly. Those folds and grooves are crucial for communication between parts of the brain. And their absence in MDS leads to so many challenges. It impacts cognitive abilities, motor skills, really their overall development.
So we're talking about significant developmental delays as a hallmark of MDS then.
Exactly. It is, imagine a child struggling to reach those milestones most parents eagerly anticipate. Walking, talking, interacting with the world. It's a journey that requires so much patience and understanding.
And a lot of strengths from their families too, I imagine.
Absolutely. And that's where those overlaps between ASD and MDS come into play. Even though their root causes are different, they can share some really striking similarities, especially in how they actually manifest in a person's behavior and development.
So we're talking about those shared challenges, like those developmental delays.
Exactly. Both ASD and MDS can lead to delays in reaching those typical developmental milestones. Think about a child with MDS who's struggling with their speech and language development. They might have difficulty expressing their needs or understanding instructions, even just engaging in a conversation. This can look very similar to the communication challenges we see in some individuals with ASD.
Yeah, it's like they're both navigating this communication gap, but for completely different reasons. And it makes you realize how important it is for everyone around them to be really attuned to their individual needs.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's not just about recognizing the delays, but understanding what's causing them, and then tailoring the support accordingly.
And these similarities aren't just limited to communication, are they? We see this overlap in behavioral patterns as well.
That's right. Individuals with MDS might display behaviors we often see in those with ASD. Imagine a child who meticulously lines up their toys, or engages in repetitive hand movements, or even has a meltdown when their routine is disrupted. These behaviors, while serving different purposes for individuals with ASD and MDS, can appear very similar to those watching them.
So then how can we differentiate between these two conditions, especially when those outward signs can be so alike?
That's where a deep understanding of their distinct characteristics is crucial. Like we've talked about, MDS is directly linked to that missing piece on chromosome 17. That genetic difference is really a defining feature that sets it apart from ASD.
So it really comes down to that genetic test. It's like looking at the source code to understand how the program is running.
Exactly. And that genetic difference often shows up in other ways, too. Individuals with MDS often have distinctive physical characteristics, ones we don't typically see with ASD. Things like a high forehead, a prominent nose, widely spaced eyes. These physical markers, along with lissencephaly, provide really important clues during diagnosis.
It's like having those extra puzzle pieces that help clinicians create a clearer picture.
Exact.
So we've got the genetics, we've got the physical characteristics,
Uh-huh.
and then there's the cognitive piece.
Right, while individuals with ASD can have a whole range of cognitive abilities. From intellectual disabilities to above average intelligence, MDS generally involves significant intellectual disabilities, and that impacts their overall development.
So the cognitive piece is another key difference. We're talking about a more predictable pattern with MDS compared to the broader spectrum we see in ASD.
Exactly, and this distinction makes a huge difference in how we approach interventions and support. What works for ASD might not be as effective for MDS.
Because those challenges stem from different underlying causes.
Exactly. Someone with MDS might need more specialized medical care and educational strategies that are specifically designed to address their needs and abilities.
It really highlights the need for those individualized care plans.
It does, because one size definitely doesn't fit all.
Now, this next question might seem like we're venturing into murky waters, but I do think it's important to address, can someone have both ASD and MDS at the same time?
It's a great question, and it highlights how incredibly complex these conditions are. And the answer, while it's still being researched, is yes, it is possible for an individual to have both ASD and MDS.
So you could have someone with that chromosome 17 deletion, the hallmark of MDS, but also exhibiting those core ASD features, the communication challenges, the repetitive behaviors, the sensory sensitivities. Wow, talk about a double whammy. What are the implications of having both then?
You're right, it does add another layer of complexity, but it emphasizes something we've been talking about this whole time: the absolute importance of individualized support. And a holistic approach to care, it's about recognizing that each person is unique.
And their support needs to reflect that.
Absolutely. When we're talking about someone with both ASD and MDS, we're talking about tailoring interventions to address a whole bunch of needs. This might mean combining behavioral therapies, speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, even educational support that's specifically designed for individuals with intellectual disabilities.
It sounds like it really does take a team.
It does. It requires collaboration between educators, therapists, medical professionals, and of course, families. We're talking about everyone working together, sharing their expertise to create a support system that truly wraps around the individual.
And let's not forget about the families themselves. They're the ones on the front lines every single day. What kind of support do they need?
Families of individuals with these conditions, they often find themselves on a really steep learning curve. They're suddenly thrust into this world of medical jargon, therapy appointments, educational advocacy. They need clear information, resources to help them navigate all of this, and a strong support network of their own.
It really is like building a village where everyone understands the challenges and celebrates the victories together. Because raising a child is hard enough as it is. But when you add in these extra layers of complexity, it really does take a village.
Absolutely, and that sense of community, of feeling seen and understood, it can make all the difference in the world for these families.
And that's something we always try to do here on the Deep Dive, to create a space where people feel like they can ask questions, explore these topics, and gain a deeper understanding.
Absolutely, because knowledge really is power, isn't it? When we understand the science behind these conditions, the challenges, the importance of the right kind of support, that's when we can advocate for change, challenge those stigmas, and ultimately, I think, create a more inclusive and compassionate world.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive on ASD and MDS, what's one key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with?
That's a great question. I think the most important thing to remember is the individual person at the heart of these diagnoses. We're not just talking about conditions, we're talking about people with their own strengths, their own challenges. It's about celebrating that neurodiversity, those differences, and creating a world where everyone feels valued.
It's about shifting our perspective from fixing to understanding.
Exactly.
From seeing differences as deficits to recognizing the incredible diversity of human experience.
You said it perfectly, and that all starts with these conversations, with education, with asking questions, with challenging our own assumptions, approaching these topics with empathy,
Because we can always learn more.
always.
Every individual with ASD, MDS, or both has their own unique story, their own way of experiencing the world. And those stories deserve to be heard.
I couldn't agree more.
So keep asking those questions. Keep seeking out those stories.
Keep diving deep.
That's a wrap on this deep dive into Autism Spectrum Disorder and Miller-Dieker Syndrome. We hope this episode helped to shed light on these complex and often misunderstood conditions